Successful entrepreneurs sometimes view money and investing completely differently from those of us in the FIRE community and are occasionally much richer and much higher earners than us. Today's episode is about the journey of one such entrepreneur, 8-figure business owner Hala Taha, and the fundamental differences in the way we see the world, think about money, investing, and life. Hello, and welcome to the BiggerPockets Money podcast. My name is Mindy Jensen, and with me as always is my entrepreneurial co-host, Scott Trench.
Thanks, Mindy. Great to be here. I'm looking forward to and always enjoy yapping with you on a regular basis. You'll get that one later. We are so excited to be joined by Hala Taha today. I won't go much into her background because that's what we're going to be talking about shortly, but she is the founder of YAP or YAP Media and left her corporate job 5 years ago to build an 8-figure business in a very short period of time. We love featuring stories of side hustles here on BiggerPockets Money, and Hala's is really an exceptional journey to wealth and entrepreneurship. Hala, welcome to the BiggerPockets Money podcast.
Scott, thank you so much for having me.
Could you start off by giving us an overview of your money story and telling us a little bit about your biggest influence on your view of money growing up?
First off, I'll start with my biggest influence, who's my biggest influence in my life in general, which is my father. So my father actually passed away during COVID, which was really devastating for me, but it was easier for me to get over it because he lived such an incredible life and had such an amazing story. So my father was 100% Palestinian. He grew up in poverty. He grew up during war. And he knew that the best way to freedom would be to be the smartest kid in town and to get a scholarship and go to college. And so he ended up doing that. He was one of the first people in his town to read, to go to college. He became a surgeon, went to medical school, became chief of surgery at multiple hospitals in America, became a business owner, owned a medical center, became extremely successful. And I'm the youngest of his 4 kids. And I felt very privileged growing up. But I saw my dad working really hard, and I saw how he came from nothing, and I saw his generosity. And so I took a lot of influence from him. So I learned a lot from him, and I'm a very generous person. I'm also a very ambitious person, I think, because of my father. I grew up post 9/11, right? So I'm also a Palestinian American. And in high school, because I was in high school during 9/11, I didn't get a lot of opportunities. I went from being the lead in all the plays, to being on the sports teams, to being very popular, to then getting kind of like outcasted in high school and not even being allowed to be in the talent show. So I was in a unique position where when I got to college, I went to a very diverse school. I didn't get into the best college because I didn't have extracurricular activities, even though I was a smart kid. I just didn't have a lot to say. And I got into like NGIT in New Jersey, which is a decent college. But the key is that it was super diverse. It was in Newark, which is like one of the most diverse cities. And so when I got there, suddenly I was equal. And then I would apply to all these different opportunities and I would get them. But the problem was I didn't get a lot of the activities that I so craved in high school that I wasn't paying attention to class. And I never went to class. And I would just do like my sorority and cheerleading and the radio club and chorus and plays. And I was just doing all these activities that I didn't get to do in the past. And so I was doing terrible in school. I ended up singing. I've always been a great singer. And I decided that a way for me to push my music would be to intern at a radio station. And so I was singing and songwriting, and I had this bright idea. I applied to all these radio stations my junior year of college. I was already like failing out of school, basically. And so I was like, I got to figure something out. And so I got this internship at Hot 97. I did really good. I ended up falling in love with radio. I was under Angie Martinez, who was the voice of New York, and I ended up dropping out of college. Basically, I was working in the studio, in the production department. I got promoted to be Angie Martinez's assistant intern, and ended up taking a free internship for 3 years. So I dropped out of school. I ended up going back to school. But during that time, I was literally making no money. The way that I made money, they did not pay me at the station. It was a really risky thing that they did. They didn't pay their interns, which was like a known thing in the radio world. And I would make my money at night selling showcase tickets, hosting underground rapper events and hosting parties and working for the DJs. And all day I'd be hustling tickets and trying to sell these showcase tickets. And I would probably was making like 30 grand a year, if anything, and like living on my brother's couch in Brooklyn. And my dad was, giving me money and supporting me. And so then I ended up quitting that job. So basically I was essentially the associate producer of that show. And when I asked for a paying job, they fired me, primarily because I shouldn't be not paid to begin with. So when I rose that flag, like, hey, I'm not being paid, I was fired immediately, which was devastating.
I know this is a pivotal moment in your story, and reflecting on my mindset around that same age, like this is a major developmental component to your journey, I believe. And I would love to get another layer of depth into what it was like to, it sounds like you poured your heart and soul into this job for a long time, and it was an utter betrayal, and how that impacted you going forward.
Oh, yeah. It was like so much betrayal. I lived at that station. I was Hala from Hot 97, all my social media handles, all my email channels. I had lost all my friends from college because they were like, mad at me that I dropped out, and all my friends became people that were in the industry. I was dating celebrities. I had online radio shows on the side, which was the precursor of podcasts. And suddenly I was like a celebrity myself. People knew me as Hala from Hot 97. I get shouted out on the radio. I was hosting all these parties. I was on the flyers of all these different parties and things like that. So I thought that I was going to be the next Angie Martinez. I was being primed to be, the next voice of New York is what I was hoping for. And I not only worked, all day during the station, I worked all night for the Hot 97 brand. So it was like an all day, all night job that I got paid, very little for. And then in terms of like the betrayal, it was really like the fact that when they fired me, it wasn't like, first of all, there was nothing to fire me from. I didn't have a real job, but they had cut my key cards. They told me I wasn't allowed to talk to anyone anymore. Angie told me, like, all the DJs called me up, Paula, I'm so sorry, like, just lay low. We're not allowed to talk to you anymore. And these were my mentors, my best friends. I had, like, dropped out of school for this opportunity, a family of immigrant doctors, like how I betrayed my family to work at Hot 97, So I was really, really devastated. But I'm not one to stay down, and I use that kind of devastation as like a chip on my shoulder to be more successful than everybody else that works at the station now. A lot of those people still have the same job as when I left because people just kind of stay in those jobs forever.
What do you think the lesson there is for someone else who's starting their career? And we're going to get into this later, but you were gracious enough to have me on your show and talk about some of my journey. And I see some parallels there where I did the same thing. I poured my heart and soul, absolutely every bit of my identity into my journey at BiggerPockets. And I had a great reward from that and did not have that same journey. How do we think about that from a lesson somebody else can take away? There's perhaps a privilege or other dynamic that goes along with that in some ways as well that we can address. But what is the lesson? Because a lot of people do that, and it seems like there's a role of chance that comes into play.
Well, one thing to be clear is even though it ended up unfortunate, I do not regret it at all. I learned so many skills from Hot 97. I learned how to audio edit. I learned how to produce shows. I learned how to do social media. I learned how to blog. I learned how to interact with celebrities. I learned so much at that job that I do not regret it at all because now I make millions of dollars a year using those same skills that I developed, not getting paid $1. So first of all, I don't regret it at all. But I do regret not realizing the environment that I was in and not like getting so personally tied up into it. It should have been a red flag that they wouldn't give me a minimum wage paying job. It should have been a red flag that I was having to do, babysit the talent's kids, on off hours and things like that. Like they were abusing me to some degree at the station, and I should have been able to kind of see that and walk away from it. But I was, wanted the brand power and everything like that. And, and especially in that kind of, music industry, there's lots of kind of, dark shadow things that are going on in that industry. So I feel like I should have been able to realize that and kind of remove myself from a poor environment or an unprofessional environment like that. And I think now there's probably a lot more rules. This was 10 years ago. There's probably a lot more rules in place in terms of like internships and things like that. But, you can't work for free forever. And nowadays, if you're an intern, you should be compensated a bit, not zero, right?
I can totally see 10 years ago being like, yeah, I'm going to do this opportunity and I don't care that I'm not getting paid because my dad is very generous and I'm not, destitute. But also like I'm hearing you say that, I asked for money and they fired me, and I am outraged on your behalf that they would fire you like that simply for advocating for yourself. But then I can hear somebody else saying, oh, okay, so then I shouldn't jeopardize my job by asking for a raise. I shouldn't jeopardize my job for, asking for money. And yeah, you should, because, you had all these great experiences, but were there other opportunities that would have paid? I mean, it clearly worked out for you, but I'm listening to, a lot of women saying, oh, I'm not getting paid what I feel I deserve, but I don't want to rock the boat. Like, at what point do you rock the boat?
I think you rock the boat when it feels right to rock the boat. And if for some reason, something happens, your back is going to be against the wall, and hopefully you take the skills that you learned and you create something bigger. And for me, that's what I did immediately. I got fired on a Thursday. By Sunday, I had a new idea. I was going to create the sorority of hip hop and recruit other girls in the entertainment industry that I felt were not getting their opportunities. I turned my problem into my next business, which was nobody was listening to me. I want to build my own platform, own my own career and path. I learned how to blog at the station. I learned how to do radio and online radio shows. I had connections now. I took all those skills, social media, hacking Twitter, and I started a blog called The Sorority of Hip Hop. Within 3 months, we were one of the most popular entertainment hip hop sites in the world. I went back to college, graduated. We almost got a reality TV show on MTV where they filmed us the entire summer. We were going to be the next Jersey Shore. We became kind of famous in the tri-state area. And it was 50, bloggers. I was the president of this thing called the Sorority of Hip Hop. So quickly turned it around and took control. And the same DJs who wouldn't pay me minimum wage, who I fed their meters, babysat their kids, who didn't give me a job at the station, then started apologizing and wanting me to host their parties and shouting me out on the radio more than I did when I even worked at the station. So sometimes you need to remove yourself from the environment and prove who you are. If they won't give you a chance, you build your own chance.
It seems like it was instinctive or easy for you to become popular over and over and over and over and over again in your life. From the internship, immediately, that I love the aggressiveness around that. A lot of people just sit there in self-pity for weeks or months after that, but no, you gotta just go right after it. You lose your job, you have 7 applications out the next week, and you take something, begin taking that first shot. I love that reaction. What is it? Is that replicable, or is that an innate talent though, to just be able to generate attention and attract interest of other people to you?
I think that is something that I naturally have. I think other people can build this skill. This is a recurring theme in my journey, is being able to recruit people who essentially work for free for me. Even at the internship at Hot 97, I was like the queen of the interns at Hot 97. I was the intern that was training all the interns at the station, right? Then started the Sorority of Hip Hop, had 100 female bloggers in and out. Then, my podcast itself, I had 20 volunteers who worked for free for me for 2 years before we started the actual company. And it was a movement. Like Young and Profiting was first a movement of volunteers in a Slack channel who I taught somebody how to video edit, audio edit, build my website, run my social. And then that literally turned into my social media and podcast production agency. And many of those people now have equity and are leaders on the team and things like that. So I have this track record of recruiting people towards a common theme movement and getting people to kind of put their efforts toward something. And similarly, I just started a charity project where I have volunteers recently for Gaza. Right. So, yeah, I think that's a common theme. I think it really just stems from, wanting to be a leader from a young age and being passionate and having people kind of feel motivated around my passion and getting people mobilized around a common cause.
Well, tell us about your journey to YAP from this point, this departure and this new idea to the business you have today.
Yeah. So basically, like I said, I started this blog. We almost got a show on MTV 3 years later. Another pivotal point was MTV decided not to air the show. So back then, if you were sitting in my shoes, I was thinking 6 years, essentially, of me working for free at the station. Then I started the Sorority of Hip Hop. We were bloggers. We were hosting parties. But I had 50 mouths to feed. I had all these bloggers, we weren't making enough money. I didn't have a good business model, right? So finally, with MTV, I was like, I'm going to make it. I'm the next, going to be on Jersey Shore. We're getting paid $5K an episode. Each lead is getting paid. Finally, we made it. That was a lot of money for me back then. And so when we didn't get the show, I was really devastated. And I felt like a shame to my family. I was like, I just got to shut everything down. I'm just going to go get my MBA, go into corporate, be a normal person. And so I did that. I literally shut everything down. I stopped posting on Instagram and Twitter, and I just got an MBA program, and I just started working at Hewlett Packard. Now, I became like an entrepreneur within the company. I was the face of the young employees at the company. I started this thing called the Young Employee Network at Hewlett Packard, and I got promoted 5 times in 5 years. And so I did really well in the corporate world, and I literally thought I would stay at Hewlett Packard forever and be the CMO. But then my last year at Hewlett Packard, I was supposed to be the president of the Global Young Employee Network, and they gave it to somebody who had no experience, and I got really pissed off. And I decided I was going to start a podcast. I was like, 2018, podcasts are blowing up. I feel like I know how to do it all. I was in the radio world. I was in the social world. I'm like running my company's LinkedIn, and I'm blowing it up. I know how to blow up on LinkedIn. And so I decided that I was going to, instead of serving 7,000 employees across Hewlett Packard, I would start my podcast and maybe have 7 million young professionals that I could lead. So I started the Young and Profiting podcast. I started my brand on LinkedIn. I became one of the biggest influencers on LinkedIn very quickly. I then moved to Disney streaming services and left Hewlett Packard. My podcast started growing really big. I would do all my interviews during lunch at Disney. They knew I had a podcast and were really supportive of it. And so I would go into the phone booth in the morning and like lock it down and work all day. And then at like 12, from 12 to 1, like have my interviews. And I was interviewing famous people already, like in the phone booth at lunch at Disney. And then COVID hit and my podcast was already like decently big and everybody started working from home. That's when unfortunately my dad got sick. And when my dad got sick and was in the hospital, I met this lady, Heather Monahan. Are you guys familiar with her?
Nope.
Mm-mm.
So she was somebody who came on my podcast. She's a really big LinkedIn influencer. She was like a big speaker. She was like somebody who I wanted to be in like 10 years. What would happen when people would come on my show, it'd be like Chris Voss and like all these like famous authors and stuff. They'd be like, Hala, how'd you grow your LinkedIn? Hala, how'd you grow your podcast? And at the time, I had 20 volunteers who worked for me. By episode 8, I had 20 volunteers in a Slack channel. That was the start of my company who would just help me. So these people would ask me at the end of the show, how, like, can you help me? Can you do my LinkedIn? Can you do my podcast? And I'd say like, I'm so sorry. Like, I've got a great job. This is just a passion project. You know, we're not making any money. Like, we're just doing this for the good of the people, you know? And that would always be my like, you know, script. Heather wouldn't leave me alone though. She asked me that question and she was like, Hala, you have to do my videos. Hala, you have to help me. Hala, I just met with Gary Vee's team. I could give him my money. I could give you my money. Like, you don't even like your job at Disney. Like, let me be your first client. And so when my dad was sick, she was like a mentor to me and she really pushed me to like start my company. And so she became my first client. I started doing all her videos using my volunteer team. And then I just piecemeal started building my company. I learned how to do full LinkedIn for myself. I started running that for other people. I learned how to produce podcasts. I started producing other people's podcasts. I learned how to monetize podcasts. I then launched my podcast network. So my company took off right away and I did it as a side hustle while working at Disney. I had 30 employees around the world, already US full-time employees, and still worked at Disney. And I was making over 6 figures a month. And then I finally quit my job at Disney. Once I did that, I got on the cover of Podcast Magazine. My podcast like grew even bigger because really my LinkedIn grew first, then my agency, then my podcast blew up. And then 2 years ago, I started my podcast network. Now we're the #1 self-improvement podcast network. We represent 35 other shows like Jenna Kutcher, Russell Brunson, Amy Porterfield, John Lee Dumas, Iced Coffee Hour, and lots of other awesome shows.
One thing that's been striking me as the story has been going is just how fundamentally different you and I and you and Mindy are in a general sense. We talked about this a little bit when I was a guest on your show as well. But, you know, I think like the thought of somebody doing a reality TV show on my life is just preposterous. Like nobody would watch that, right? Mindy, how would it go for you if someone were to turn on the reality TV show for you?
The Rich and the Boring with Mindy Jensen.
Your story is, you imagine that there's just exciting, like really crazy things going on the entire way through. Tons of famous people that you're meeting, all of these really cool events that you're doing there. I'm wondering how your money situation evolved over this time period.
Oh, this is such a good question.
Like I'm sitting here, like my day, I'm getting up, I work out, Zoom meetings, you know, hang out with my family. Something different's going on there, and I'm accumulating a lot of cash. Are you able to accumulate cash during this period?
Yeah, such a good question. I mean, I can just like go back because like the amount of money that I make now is like insane and it's all this like compounding effect and like sacrifice, right? So at the station, working at Hot 97, didn't get paid during the daytime, made money at night, probably made like $1,000 a week if I was lucky. Maybe like doing this showcase stuff at night, maybe even less, probably like $500 a week if I'm thinking about it. So I was making nothing at Hot 97 during that time period. My first job when I graduated college, before I took my MBA, I didn't talk about it, I worked at a water company. I made $27,000 a year living in New York City. That is a terrible salary, okay? I hated that job. I smoked cigarettes at lunch during that job. I've never smoked cigarettes in my life, and like that's how much everybody hated their job. We would just like smoke cigarettes at lunch. It was terrible, okay? $27,000 a year. Then I got my MBA. Now that was a huge jump. My MBA internship was $90K a year. Okay. Then I got promoted and I ended up probably making $150K a year by the time I was at the end of Hewlett Packard.
Could you give us one thing I think we've missed during this is the timeline here. When did you graduate college and when did you go into the interns program? Excuse me. And what year were you starting to make this 150 or so?
My college journey is so messed up because I had dropped out of school. So I would say I started Hewlett Packard in like 2014 and I left in like 2019. Okay, so 2014, I started making $90K a year. By the end of that, I was making like $150K a year. I left Disney because they gave me a bump. So I started making like $170K. It wasn't even that huge of a jump. I just wanted to leave Hewlett Packard. So I had a good job, like by all standards, at Disney streaming services. I was a smart girl, and like able to produce, right? So I was making good money. So like once I had the podcast, okay, when I quit my job, I started paying myself a salary of just $60,000 a year. So I actually took less money out of the business so that I could hire people and things like that. Then I started getting sponsorships from my podcast, and I used my sponsorships to bootstrap my company. I have been doing my podcast, which has been a top podcast, for like 7 years. I've been monetizing it for 5 years. I've only started taking my sponsorship money for the last 2 years. Now my salary is like $400,000 a year, fast forward to today. And my podcast makes $1 million a year and I take 50% payouts. So almost at $1 million a year cash from my salary with my sponsorships and my salary. My podcast really is what enabled me to fund this entire business and never take, and I still own like 95% of the company.
Going back just a step before this explosion of income and the very successful business that you built, were you able to accumulate cash or build wealth on this journey prior to that? And how did that translate to taking that leap, the comfort with going from 175 or whatever at Disney to the 60?
When I quit my job, I had about $100,000 saved. I had about maybe $50,000 or so in stocks. Once COVID hit and the stocks were like, crashing, I sold my stocks like an idiot, took that money out, used that for more bootstrapping of my company. And so for a long time, for like 2 years when I first started building my company, I couldn't save any money because I just kept pumping money back into the business. And I decided I'd rather pump money back into my business and invest in myself rather than save, because I thought that I'd make more than, 5% putting it in a high yield savings fund if I just bet on my business, which turned out, I think, to be true. So last year, my business made $7.5 million. My podcast made $1 million. And this year, we're on track for 8 figures. It was a long journey, though, because I slowly started giving myself more salary, but things really didn't change until I was like, okay, guys, I'm going to take a payout now from my podcast and start really paying myself.
Well, awesome. Congratulations on those enormous numbers. Love it.
Thank you. I'm sure you guys are crushing it on your podcast. Podcasts make money.
No 8 figures here at BP Money. So.
Oh, let me help.
You said you had 100,000 saved up before you left your job. Was that for bootstrapping the business, or was that just for living expenses?
All my living expenses I covered with the money that I made from the company. And the $100,000 was like, I can't have less than this or I'll feel like insecure. So that $100K was just like my money. And I also had 401ks. So I'm not including that. So I had 401ks from both HP and Disney, which was like another like $100,000 or so. And like those two things that was like my nest egg, and like I just wouldn't touch it. And then everything else I just invested back into the business.
Have you gone back to see how much those stocks would be worth now if you didn't sell them?
No,
Don't.
they would be worth so much more.
But she made the right call. There's no way that they would compete with what she just discussed there.
I made the wrong call with crypto though, because my second and third episodes in 2018 were like literally I spent 3 months just learning because crypto was so new back then. And then I didn't invest in anything, even though I was like studying it for 3 months, which I'm kicking myself for that because a lot of people got really rich from that.
You don't have to use crypto to grow your wealth. I am a very vocal non-fan of crypto. The first time I heard about Bitcoin was way back when Greece was having a lot of financial turmoil in their country, and it was $6,000. And I'm like, who'd pay $6,000 for some fake thing? And now it's a little bit more.
Well, there's a lot of, I'm in Austin, and I think that's why. In Austin, there's so many crypto people. I'm like, oh my God, like these people are so filthy rich.
Not just Austin.
Now that you are earning an elite income and have a very successful business, I think you said 5 years ago, was it 5 years ago that you started the business in earnest and really went full time into it?
Yeah.
What does your investment portfolio look like, just in the way it's shaped? What are you investing in? And what are you building towards with your investment portfolio outside of the business?
Well, I'm still heavily invested in my business. I invest in stocks, and I usually invest in technology stocks. So like the stocks that I usually focus on are like Google, Meta, Nvidia, like AI stocks. And I really just put all my money, Tesla, like in kind of technology stocks. And I don't look at anything else because they've done really well for me. I put all my cash in high yield savings accounts. I've still got my 401ks. I probably should consolidate them from my corporate jobs. I still have those floating around. And then now I'm getting into real estate. So I am sponsored by Airbnb and I want to start Airbnbs. So I'm starting with buying my own place, condo, and in the same building, I'm buying another condo that I'm going to be using as a studio and more as like an experiential Airbnb that I'll also probably rent out. So pretty excited about that. And then I'm just going to keep buying condos and houses, I think, and run Airbnbs so long as I can find somebody else to do all the work for it.
Well, I love it. We talked about this briefly on your show, and I didn't realize that Airbnb was a component of that strategy. So I love it. It's definitely a much better time to get into Airbnb now than it was, 2 or 3 years ago when it was boiling hot in the industry. And there's I think there's opportunity especially for those who are willing to make the experiential plays like you are and treat it like a business.
Yeah, I'm really excited about that. Honestly, I feel like it will satisfy an itch that I haven't been able to really do. It feels really creative.
Another question for you on this topic. First, what is your approach to cash management, both personally and in your business? I've observed, for example, that entrepreneurs tend to pile up a lot more cash between their personal and business than many other people. But is that true for you specifically?
The way that we handle it is that we've got our company and then it pays my LLC. And so I like to keep cash in the company at least 3 to 6 months runway of everybody's salaries. And so I don't take a ton of cash out of the business. The way that I generate my cash, I think, is really unique. I just get so much money from my podcast ads. And that is the big cash that I kind of take out of the business. So I don't know if that answers your question or if there's something more specific you're wondering about.
Sounds like you have 3 to 6 months of cash in the business. And then you also have personal cash that you consider separately from that, which amounts to, I'm sure, a very large overall cash position, very conservative. Do you put debt on your business?
No, we don't take any debt. We're very much believers in bootstrapping. We might start apply to have the option to take out debt. Like if we needed, an emergency $50,000 or something so that we can start taking more distributions and feeling comfortable having less money in the company. But I don't really want to do that. I feel like we don't need to. And so I prefer not to do that.
What advice would you give to somebody who's listening to this, who's entrepreneurial, who's got a business that's, they think could be in the realm of yours from cash generation in a few years? How should they think about their overall investment portfolio, perhaps compared to a typical W-2 worker?
My advice is to sell, right? You've got to figure out how you can sell at the highest price point in the market, how you can arbitrage talent so that you don't have have a lot of expenses. And that's how you generate cash. And I'm saying this because I feel like a lot of entrepreneurs, they don't think enough about their business model. They don't think enough about the fact that like the lifeblood of any business is actually sales. And almost every problem that a business will have, cash flow, not good enough talent, no market demand, that's all from not being able to sell. And so I think problem number one that you need to focus on before you even care about the cash that you're accumulating is, can you make sales? Can you charge high prices? Can you find an audience that is willing to pay? Or can you find volume? You know, it's either volume or high prices and like a really exclusive type of audience. So I feel like that's what you really need to focus on. And then all the other stuff kind of comes naturally, rather than worrying about how much cash you should have without thinking about what are you selling.
Awesome. And what advice would you give to somebody who is an entrepreneur about their personal portfolio, in addition to, I think part of the answer I think you just gave is selling in your business is so much more important than anything you're doing in your personal portfolio. That's really where the focus needs to lie. I think is what I'm reading from that answer. I think that's absolutely right for most entrepreneurs. But I am curious if you have any thoughts on the personal finance component for those entrepreneurs of the cash that they are distributing from the business.
I would say that make sure that you're not having like a bunch of cash. I know when you're focused on your business, sometimes you don't focus as an entrepreneur on your personal side. You're so worried about the business that you're not even focused on building your own personal assets and things like that. So I would advise you to pull out money. I wish I pulled out money earlier from my company, and I feel like I waited too late and like I didn't reward myself early enough, right? So pull out your money. I like stocks, put it in stocks that you believe in, like products that you use yourself, right? And that you know for sure like have product market fit because you love them, right? Put all your cash in a high yield savings account. Don't let it just like sit. I can't tell you how long I had my cash sitting in a Bank of America account that was making no percent on my money for a long time. That 100K never grew because I never took it out of my account that I had since I was, 18 years old, right? So make sure you move your money. It takes an hour to figure out, right? So don't overthink it. And then, follow BiggerPockets and things like that if you want to learn about real estate. I took a long time to really invest in anything else because like I said, I was investing in myself. And to me, one of my assets is my brand. And so I continually invested back into my brand and into my podcast. The way that podcasts work is that you basically get paid proportionally to how many views and downloads you have. So anytime I had like 10 extra K, I would just put that straight into my podcast because I knew I would make like 4 times ROI on that money as soon as I put it in, and I had proved that out, right? So that's what I did. I took all my money and I invested it back into my show, back into my brand.
Love it. And I think that's the answer, is just invest it back into your business if you're truly an entrepreneur on this front for the most part, because that's going to probably provide much, much higher ROI. And again, I just love this chat because we're so fundamentally different in the way that we view money. And there's so many paths to winning in the world of personal finance and money. And it's just, of course, I'm CEO of BiggerPockets this whole time. And I'm thinking, how do I build my personal portfolio in addition to the business? But I view them so fundamentally separately. And I think it's just an interesting perspective from you as the founder and owner of your business.
Yeah. And I don't think there's a right answer. I think it's like your risk for appetite and, what feels natural for you. For me, just selling feels natural and building something as big as possible feels natural. And, the rewards came. So good for us.
So Hala, I have a question. You are super successful in your business, but it seems like you are a driving factor with your business. Do you have an exit strategy for the business?
I'm not thinking that we're going to exit for a while. And I've talked a lot about myself, but I do have 2 amazing partners. One of them I'm working on a vesting agreement with. His name is Jason. One is Kate, who runs my social media agency. They're basically homegrown executives that have been with me for many years. Kate was actually part of that volunteer group from back in the day. I see them kind of scaling and helping me build the company. Maybe one day Jason will be CEO and I'll step down as CEO and start a family and things like that. And I see that definitely happening in our future. We want to grow the company to $100 million valuation. That's the goal in the next 3 years. And so if we end up selling, that's a path we would take. We're kind of working with lawyers to make sure that our company is set up for success for a sale down the line. But for me, I would be happy running a $30 million company forever. I love this job. I don't think I'll ever quit my podcast. So for me, it's not so much about selling it down the line, but about growing it as big as possible. And if a sale happens and we feel good about it, we'll do it.
Awesome. Hala, you mentioned you have a podcast, but very few podcasts alone generate 8 figures in revenue, right? I mean, like you talk about Joe Rogan and those types of things. What is it that your business actually does to generate this 8 figures in revenue?
So I have 2 sides of the business. I have a social media and podcast production agency where we run people's LinkedIn, their podcast, their YouTube. Now, this is like a talent-heavy focused part of the business. It is not something that we're really interested in scaling. We've got like 20 very high profile clients. They do like retainers that start for anywhere from 10K to 30K a month. And it's like a very white glove service for like typically 8-figure entrepreneurs, big influencers, and we run their social accounts. Okay. So that's one side of the business that we're not really trying to scale. We're totally focused on scaling the network. So the network is basically where we grow and monetize other podcasters. And so I'm actually not the biggest podcaster in my network. I probably still make the most money out of everybody right now, but like there's close seconds. But like we just signed, for example, Iced Coffee Hour, which is a bigger show than mine. And so we signed Iced Coffee Hour. We've got Jenna Kutcher, Amy Porterfield, Russell Brunson. We've got all these amazing podcasters. And my job is to grow and monetize their show. And we take a rev share. It's 70-30. We take 30% of everyone's sponsorships. And we do all the selling, the ad ops, the flighting. And we don't only sell podcast ads. We also sell creative campaigns. So paid interviews, mini-series, sponsored webinars, live events, virtual events. We're now selling for Tony Robbins and Dean Graziosi's monthly mastermind, getting them sponsorships, right? You can almost think of us as an influencer marketing company that really caters to podcasters. So we basically flight everybody's ads, do all the ad ops, do all the sales, that side of it, and then we just take a rev share. The other thing that I do is I try to grow my network. So I'm like, putting everybody in growth programs, trying to grow everybody's simulcast, doing all these like testing programs, helping people rank on Apple and Spotify so they can get organic traction, PSO, podcast search optimization. And so like my 2 main jobs is just sell. All my shows are sold out for the entire year. For example, we do an awesome job selling and growing our shows. So that's really our main focus, and scaling that out and just recruiting more and more big podcasts.
Awesome. Well, that sounds like a very scalable business that would be exit ready at some point in the future. And there, it sounds like it is not about you. You're just the face of one of those podcasts. And what a wonderful business model. You've done a great job with this. So congratulations.
Thank you.
Hala, this has been so much fun. Where can people find you online?
Yeah, thank you so much. I really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you guys for having me. Well, first off, I've got the Young and Profiting podcast. We interview the brightest minds in the world. So I've interviewed people like Damon John, Alex Ramosi, Matthew McConaughey. It's an amazing show. Go check it out, Young and Profiting. If you want to find out about the network or the social agency, it's yapmedia.com, yapmedia.com.
Thank you so much for having me on your show and then coming back here on the BiggerPockets Money podcast. It has been a real privilege to meet you and chat with you these last couple of hours, and look forward to sharing your story.
Yeah, likewise. It was such a pleasure. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Hala, and we'll talk to you soon. All right, that was Hala Taha. Scott, what did you think of the show?
I loved it. I mean, I think that a lot of people probably are listening to this on BiggerPockets Money and being like, well, hey, I'm working my job, or I got my small business and I'm steadily marching toward FI and I'm in that grind. And, folks like Hala come along and just kind of totally wash away and send to the side this notion of the grind. Do not do any of the serious hardcore saving or investing, and then build a thriving business. And I think that it's really important to be reminded of these different types of journeys here, because there are no hard and fast rules in finance at the end of the day. And entrepreneurship and successful business building can obviate the need for tons of these other components of a financial journey if you're wired for it and entrepreneurial like that. I also thought it was really funny because as parts of the journey, I respected Hala's journey so much. And I just find it so funny how, I just cannot relate to anyone ever wanting to do an MTV show about my life. And I think Mindy feels the same way here.
100%.
It's so different. It's just like, it's not a worldview that I'm even able to like contemplate. I just like, it's so ridiculous to envision someone coming into our house and trying to film a day of my life and people thinking this is exciting in some way. So that's just not the way I do it, and not the way that I think a lot of folks do it. But there are so many people out there who that is for, and there are so many ways to use a personality, a skill set, a charisma like Hala has to create those types of opportunities. So great for her. Really learned a lot here. And I think it's just a really good reminder of the differences that people have. And you can have that and 10, 15 years can go by and it can look like you're not getting ahead financially. And then poof, explosion from your business. There's always opportunities out there.
Hey, MTV, if you ever want to produce what would absolutely be the lowest rated show you've ever done, hit me up, Mindy at BiggerPocketsMoney.com.
Mindy becomes millionaire over 25 years of frugal saving and lifestyle design.
And instant success overnight in just 25 short years.
0.5% a month for 25 years,
Scott, one thing Hala said that I absolutely loved was, I turned my problem into my next business. And I think this is where a lot of really successful ideas come from. Are you interested in entrepreneurship? What is a problem that you have and how can you solve it? Because if you're having that problem, I can almost guarantee lots of other people are having that problem too. So I love that that was her mindset. It wasn't, oh, poor me. It was, how can I fix this problem?
I think that it's also just this component. Like, I think some people, like everyone's going to have rough patches along their journey. Like, I don't know of anybody who had a 30-year career of just straight up success the entire way through without interruption in there. And it's how you respond to those setbacks that's really important. And you can't respond by being despondent for months and months or weeks and weeks after a setback. It's got to be, that sucks. I'm going to take the night, maybe the weekend and think about it. And I'm back to work on Monday or better yet, Sunday, getting after the next opportunity, whether that's getting my resume ready, getting a business plan ready, or otherwise just jumping on something and moving forward. That's the characteristic that has defined Hala's journey that clearly has led to the explosion eventually of her business here.
Yep. Absolutely.
One other observation I want to make about Hala's journey is I thought it was fascinating when I asked her about her investment portfolio. What do you invest in? And she didn't even register the question about her financial portfolio. It was in sales, of course, and growing my business. We spend all this time on BiggerPockets Money obsessing over the personal portfolio and the accumulation of wealth to build a FIRE portfolio. And she didn't even really get the question from it. That's really fascinating. And I don't think that's going to be that uncommon among a lot of serious hardcore entrepreneurs out there. And that's something to consider. How does that impact the way we think about a portfolio that's smart for an entrepreneur? Is it a very low risk, high cash position because it's not even really on your brain, or maybe it shouldn't be because you're building a business? Of course, all the extra cash is going into the business in there. I thought that was a fascinating response from a true entrepreneur into that question around portfolio building.
That was, yeah, I really liked that answer for her. She's investing in herself. She's investing in her business. And that's how you grow. That is the difference between somebody who is making, 8, 10 figures and somebody who isn't.
And is it better risk-adjusted investing for Hala and many entrepreneurs and folks like her than what we talk about all day on BiggerPockets Money? Again, I just found it a fascinating glimpse into a really different mind and entrepreneurial journey.
Absolutely a different mindset, but entrepreneurs need to have a different mindset. All right, Scott, should we get out of here?
Let's do it.
That wraps up this episode of the BiggerPockets Money podcast. He is Scott Trench. I am Mindy Jensen saying, catch you later, elevator.